I don't know if you guys got any locked and loaded, but we typically start off with Chris, who's been silent today for the most part. Chris, what you got, bro?
All right. I think the Rolling Stones are criminally overrated if you compare them to the Beatles and other stuff coming out of that region. Out of all of them, I would put the Stones pretty low on my list.
Really?
I would.
Chris, I couldn't agree with you more.
Oh, fuck yeah.
I think that's a somewhat popular opinion.
You think? Because
I mean, the Rolling Stones are huge.
Yeah, they're pretty popular.
When I feel like I hear Rolling Stones and the Beatles in the same breath a lot of the time, and like they're like, oh, everything coming out of that era, and it's like the Beatles were so much further ahead creatively, sonically, and the Stones were like the ugly stepchild that always wanted to ride to the mall or something. They're like, let me in the car, and they would always get in, but like not deserving of that shotgun seat, you know?
I think that's cool. I more or less agree. Like, the Stones are one of those bands that if I really stop and listen, I can find things to appreciate, and I can understand why people connect with them.
Totally.
And I've never seen them live, and I understand that, you know, they put on a hell of a show. So I would enjoy seeing them live, maybe like in their hundreds. But when I listen to them, I don't connect very much. Your unpopular opinion is popular with me.
Hell yeah. And
Yeah,
I mean,
me too.
like, they started out, like, both the Beatles and the Stones started off doing like a lot of cover stuff, and I feel like the Stones never got past that phase. Like, they were so influenced by
Right, they
like
didn't really
American
invent a
blues
sound.
rock. Yeah, like, and they kind of stuck in that sound where the Beatles started with that and like grew to develop this whole other texture, and like the Stones kind of just stayed right where they were, you know? And that's good on them. They found a formula that worked and everything, but I don't know. That's just a little too much hype for me.
Nice.
Well, I gotta say that just playing devil's advocate here,
Play away.
those kids
Play
that-
some sympathy for the devil for me.
I don't know. I think that taking into account the timing of when it was all taking place, you had, very little bands, I think, that were pulling from the more blue collar blues and country thing and bringing it to the mainstream. And I think the Rolling Stones were kind of doing a unique take on a lot of the stuff at that time. Not saying that if they were to come out and do their thing now, there would be anything groundbreaking. If they were to come back now and do what they were doing, I would say, you could catch them at a local bar on the weekends and that would be fine. But given the time, I think that they were a little bit more ahead of it than we're giving them credit for.
There's a difference between being, important and being overhyped. Like, yeah, that's an important thing to do, but like, there was a lot of musicians that did a lot of groundbreaking work that do not get talked about like that. So,
what were you gonna say, Silas?
Yeah, I also think, like Chris said, you do hear that Rolling Stones, Beatles debate, or you hear people say like, I'm more of a Stones person or I'm more of a Beatles person, which, in the end, it's all just kind of silly and for fun. But I do think, using the thought experiment that you just used, Anton, that if you brought the Beatles back, particularly, later, last 5-6 albums, Beatles, presently, it would actually still be like fairly groundbreaking. I mean, obviously so many bands have been influenced by them that it's not going to come out sounding, maybe insanely different than like Dr. Dog or something. But I do think their music would still be like pretty groundbreaking now, 50 years or whatever it's been later, which is cool to think about, that, that it was that much of their own sound, that even with all the imitation of it, kind of nobody's really come close.
That's very true, actually, and something that I didn't really think about, because if you do compare the later years of the Beatles to where the Stones were at that time, and you were to take them both and recreate them now, I think the Beatles stuff would still definitely hold up, particularly like, Revolver, even Rubber Soul and on, like a lot of the, Sgt. Pepper's, Abbey Road, Magical Mystery Tour. A lot of that stuff was so production-wise, like, advanced, and the ideas and the use of like the orchestra and all the different textures that they were coming up with. It'd be an interesting competitor in the market today, I would say, in the pop world for sure. What unpopular opinions you guys have to bring to us today?
Well, does it have to be music related?
No, it
or
can
is
be about
just
literally
like life in general.
anything you want.
I have one of each.
Okay, let's hear them.
Let's hear them.
And Kasah said that you wanted something that would spark some debate or whatnot.
I love debates.
And my unpopular opinion is that global warming, which is a totally real thing, is actually a good thing.
Uh-oh. Here we go.
Which is it's just like, that's obviously an unpopular opinion.
Yeah.
The reason is, first of all, if global warming does in fact lead to our extinction, that'd be great for the planet because we are terrible. And if it doesn't, it could potentially, I think it needs to be a humbling experience for us as human beings to learn that we have horribly mishandled ourselves on this planet, and we do need to be punished for that. And if we don't get super punished for it, or if we get punished enough but we don't go extinct, then it will lead to some fantastic innovation as far as technology, so that we can come out smarter and better prepared for the future on the other side.
Yeah, well, that's definitely a silver lining.
I can get behind that.
So that's my popular opinion about global warming.
Yeah.
It does feel like we have to have things that are so extreme for humans on any kind of large scale to make any kind of change. The repercussions have to be so extreme. It makes me think of, I think David Cross had a joke in one of his stand-up specials. I forget the specifics, but the gist of it was like, how many people need to be killed in a mass shooting for us to do something different about guns? And he was, like, oh, I calculated a number. It's 1,232 people have to die in a mass shooting. But the problem is it has to be cumulative. I mean, it can't be cumulative. It has to all be in like one, and it does kind of feel like that. Like if truly life-shattering, world-shattering things don't happen, we'll just keep on trucking with the status quo.
Right. And I think that there's also an important thing to note with that is that the Earth will be okay regardless of what we do. The thing at risk is our species. So it's like, like the idea of global warming and whatever contribution we're making to it is like, okay, it might not ruin the Earth totally, but because the Earth is going to adjust and then we're going to be destroyed however we're destroyed. And there is an argument, even in the like a real argument in the political sphere, about how we handle it. And there are some newer schools of thought about building technology to help us adapt to the inevitable, or do we continue to try and push more regulation and trying to prevent it? And a lot of the argument is, well, we're not going to prevent it now, it's happening. So what do we create or invent now to adapt and keep us from totally, being obliterated by the conditions that we create,
Yeah, like I'm looking forward to those innovations in technology that come about, because like you said, we're past the point of no return. So there's no reversing it at this point. So we'll get some sweet new technology at some point.
Exactly. Exactly. Jesse, what's your other one?
Oh, my musical related one is that, so as I've gotten older, I've gotten a lot more into pop music, which when I was a kid, I hated pop music. Now I love it. And even like horrible sugar pop is a good thing for music. I'm glad it exists. When I was younger, I was of the opinion that it was horrible and that people that listened to it were simpler, at least in their tastes of music, not in their thinking, that they're simpler tastes. But now I have come to realize that it's not only enjoyable to listen to, but it's also good for the ecosystem of music, because there's just something about the universality of music that's enjoyable to listen to on a very surface level that appeals to just it just feels good, And I think even though the songwriting is trite or been done a million times before, and just repurposing the same 3 chords and melodies and harmonies every single song, it still feels good, and I support it.
I actually agree with that. Yeah, there's like it's also like a lot of the producers that they work with are pretty knowledgeable and extraordinarily talented, and have done a lot of the work on there. And like Jeff Basker is somebody who produces a lot of pop artists, and he produced a couple of the tracks on Dua Lipa's last album, and he's like a Berkeley trained musician. Like and if you listen to the track in particular that he produced, there's little nuggets in there for like musicians and real appreciators of music to catch on to, like little like hip progressions that are kind of buried where you're like, oh, after the second or third listen you catch shit. And a lot of the pop music that's being produced now, I feel like, has this element of jazz and even gospel that gets thrown into it, particularly the live performance side, that I think makes the music a lot more enjoyable across the board, because they figure out a way to make it palatable, but then also hide these cool little things for people that really think about music on a deeper level, you know?
Yeah.
Totally.
Silas, what you got for unpopular opinions, bro?
My unpopular opinion is that Roger Waters is one of the greatest singers in rock history.
Okay.
And I just say unpopular because I don't think he would make any list or has ever made any list of great singers. And I think there's even somebody in his band that is in many ways a much better singer than him, but he kind of embodies the attitude and spirit and drama and theatrics of what to me is the most likable thing about a singer that I connect with. And I think like we in our thinking about singers, we over prioritize technical skill and talent more than our ears and hearts actually react to those things. If that makes sense, if that's not too esoteric.
Yeah.
I agree. I think I would put, because I'm a huge Steely Dan fan, so I would kind of put Roger Waters in a similar vein as like Donald Fagen, where like, no, his voice is not the greatest voice of all time, but he's a fantastic singer because he's serving the song, and the quirkiness is a part of it. And similar to like Bob Dylan, although Bob Dylan is pretty rough, but like he's got all the emotion, and he's hitting on all those other things in a similar vein. So yeah, I could see it. It may not, like you said, maybe not that his voice may not be the most technically brilliant voice as far as technical ability, but
he's downright pitchy, like fairly regularly, but I just don't even feel like it matters. I mean, Beatles is another good example. Like John, I feel like, by any kind of technical evaluation, Paul is a better singer than John.
Oh yeah.
But I love both their singing. I mean, John sounds, fantastic, even when he's not nailing it from any kind of technical aspect, because he's just bringing so much personality and attitude to it. If somebody asked me, to list my top 50 favorite singers of all time, I doubt one of them is going to be someone like, I don't know, Mariah Carey or something, who is like technically just insanely skilled, but like that just doesn't particularly move me,
Yeah, there's like a characteristic that a lot of these people have, like the people that you're mentioning, like John Lennon, Bob Dylan, obviously, in his own way, Roger Waters, even David Gilmour too. He's got a uniqueness, a character to his voice that may not come through as technically the best. Like they're not going to, you stack them up against in the rock realm like Freddie Mercury or Roger Daltrey, like they're not going to hold up technically.
No.
But there's a uniqueness to what they do, and that to me is like the artistry. Like I would tend to agree with you, but I would probably reframe it as more of like an artistry argument. There's a full scope of what we're looking at here. It's not just the technical ability, it's what's coming through in their voice, the character, and what the performance side, like what are they portraying. It's theatrical. There's so much more to it than just hitting the right notes.
Yeah, I love that theatrical element. Like I've always thought of Roger Waters more as like more akin to like a Disney villain than to Freddie Mercury or something. Like
exactly.
the way he pulls off those theatrics and that personality, to me, is just so cool. I just love it.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you. I love that. That's a great opinion for sure. Okay, kind of tagging on to the global warming thing. Seems to be a pretty unpopular opinion amongst a lot of people, but I think that the world is overpopulated. I have a feeling like we're not going to get anybody here who disagrees with me on that, but I think that the general consensus amongst people is that we have much more room to procreate and there's enough resources to take care of everybody. And that's not the point that I'm really trying to drive home when I'm saying that the world is overpopulated. But I do believe that we are overpopulated for sure.
Wait, so what are you saying? We aren't overpopulated?
No, we are overpopulated. I was just making the argument that the general consensus would say that we aren't. There's plenty of resources in space for people to continue to procreate. And that's not the point that that's not the case that I would make. You know, I think that we are overpopulated for different reasons.
Yeah. We're overpopulated. I think our population just grew exponentially too fast.
That's what it is, yeah.
For the existing system, so we've had to resort to things, namely factory farming, in order to sustain the caloric needs of the population, which has decimated the planet. So if we had reached the same population, but over a longer period of time, we could have hopefully come up with more sustainable methods of feeding the population.
That's what ends up happening. I feel like when we talk about resources in space, it's like, well, human needs grow exponentially, and not to mention that when people are confined into bigger cities, there's this idea of scarcity. There's this illusion of scarcity, so people tend to just naturally consume more and hoard, which becomes a big problem, and it kind of, you know, perpetuates the factory farming, the mass production of goods, which, you know, ultimately the quality control goes out the window, and whatever we're consuming across the board, whether it be food, art, or anything, it's not, there's no substance in it. So we end up creating a very unhealthy population across the board, mentally, physically, otherwise. And that's why we end up in a culture like we are today, which is not sustainable. You know, if we continue to grow this version of humanity exponentially, there's no way it's sustainable, in my opinion.
Yeah. So you're saying everybody needs to start practicing abstinence?
Yeah, or maybe we incentivize, like, what do you call it when you get snipped?
Vasectomy.
Vasectomy. We incentivize vasectomies, or
absolutely.
You know what I mean? Like, hey, if
all
you get
you have to do is start just giving tax break. Like, you get a tax break if you're cut.
Yeah,
and the problem is solved.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I would 100 as a musician 120% do that if I got a tax break to snip my shit, bro. Are you serious?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you just made the operation free, I'm game.
Yeah, totally.
What do you think, Chris? Are we overpopulated?
Totally. Yeah, I mean, there's 100%. There's just way too many of us running around. In fact, if we could start with the musicians and just kind of trim that herd down, so just get a little more gig opportunities here and there, and then the rest of them we'll get those guys figured out. But
yeah.
yeah.